everybody. You know, we spoke to Major Hoi Tran just last week on this show, and he was so informative that we've invited him back at the suggestion, in fact, of some of our viewers. His book is here, A Vietnamese Former Pilot in an American War. Major Tran was born in North Vietnam. He then went to the South. He became, as I say, a major, but he was a fighter pilot for the South. He is an American citizen, and his tale is so interesting because he highlights so many things that none of us ever knew about the Vietnam War, things that we never read, things that were never brought to us by the press. So, okay, we're going to pick it up where we left off, and we're going to remind our viewers that if they missed part one, they can go to Local On Demand and see part one, because that'll be running. So, we talked about the fall of Vietnam, and then you came to the United States. You had been here to train earlier, but what happened after the war to you? And also, what happened to your family? Now, your mother, I keep interrupting myself. Your mother was in the North, and once you said the bamboo curtain fell and she could not get out to join you in the South. What happened to her?
Right. After 1975, I went to the United States to rebuild my life here. And about 5 or 6 years later, through a friend, I realized that my mother was still alive in Hanoi, and my sister and brother were still alive in
you
Hanoi.
had no contact with them during the war at all?
No. After going south, the bamboo curtain fell, and then there was absolutely no communication between the North and the South. Yeah. And besides, I did not want to jeopardize my security clearance by communicating with people in North Vietnam. So therefore, it was completely blackout, no contact until I was in the United States. And then after knowing through the friend that my mother was still alive, I took a chance asking that friend to have his relative in Hanoi to look for my mother. So I gave them the information, and about a month later, he received a letter from his relative from Hanoi that they were in fact in contact with my mother. So I began to write a letter to my mother. There was no telephone call back then, but we kept communicating through letters.
She must have been just thrilled to hear from you, and vice versa, for you to know that she was alive.
That is correct. And then I sent home some medications and some things that I think were needed in North Vietnam for my mother. But later on, when I had a chance to see her, I learned that most of the things that I sent home for her did not get into her hands.
Isn't that awful?
Yeah.
That's a shame. But then, so afterwards, then you went to see her.
I was not very comfortable thinking about going back to Vietnam until the mid-1990, when we the U.S. lifted the embargo to Vietnam and reestablished diplomatic relations. Then I decided to go to see my mother in Hanoi. Many of my friends told me that you should not, because of your involvement in striking North Vietnam during the war.
As a fighter pilot.
As a fighter pilot. So maybe you should not go. But then I decided to go to see my mother anyway, and I told them that if anything happened to me, I would consider that a filial duty to my mother that I had left 4 decades ago. Yeah. So I decided to go in 1998.
Yeah.
Yes. During the transatlantic flight, I was a little nervous, thinking what will happen to me. But then on the final approach at the Noi Bai airport in Hanoi, I was a little excited and seeing some old MiG airplanes along the taxiway. And then when reaching the immigration office, before that, I told my wife, I took my wife along with me, so I told my wife that if the immigration officer looks at my passport and waves me through, then there will be no problem, and then you can go through. But then if they look at my passport and they look at the door or look at the terminal, computer terminal, then that signals the problem. Mm-hmm. So you should immediately return and go to the U.S. Embassy to report everything, and then call my work in the States to let them know what is happening to me so that they can interfere. Fortunately, everything was okay. My youngest brother came over to greet us at the airport and took me home to see my mother. It was a very emotional meeting after so many years. Yes.
Of course. Mm-hmm. Now, your younger brother, of course, grew up in the North.
Yes.
Did he have any preconceived ideas? You mentioned some of the people who fought for the North, and they had the idea that that Saigon was this terrible place where they really had to go in to rescue the people. Mm-hmm. Totally different from what was actually there. So did he have preconceived ideas, or did he discuss that at all with you?
Well, actually, when meeting my mother and my youngest brother, we did not talk about the war at all. Mm-hmm. For some reasons, I did not want to trouble him or vice versa.
Yeah.
So we did not talk about the war, but I guess he knew what I did in the South, mm-hmm. but he did not ask what I did. But during the conversation with my mother, I asked her about my uncle, mm-hmm. That she knew that when he came back from France, my father gave him a room downstairs for his medical practice. But then upon the call of revolution to gain independence for Vietnam, he was so fascinated with that, and he gave up his practice and joined the revolution. So I asked my mother, after the war, did Uncle Kong come back? And she said, yes, he did. But he came back, and he was he felt very sorry for what he had done, thinking that he somehow participated in the destruction of his own country. Because when he joined the revolution, he was close to the higher-ranking communist members, and he knew that it was not for independence, liberty, and happiness as they propagated.
Yeah.
And then later on, he became heavy alcoholic, and he died subsequently of depression.
Mm.
Yeah.
How sad. People don't think about, and they should, how wars affect the private lives of people. Now, your story, fortunately, is a happy one.
Well, I was lucky in the sense that I made it out after the collapse of the Republic of South Vietnam.
How did you get out?
Again, it was luck more than anything else. I happened to help one American airline called Flying Tigers.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Flying Tigers was the contracted carrier for the Department of Defense at the time, I think, to transport war materials to Saigon. Mm-hmm. So through my flying with Air Vietnam, I happened to know the station manager there, and I helped him with some of the unloading crews and whatnot. And so therefore, he gave me the signal that Flying Tigers will probably cease operating in Vietnam. And when I came over, he was already in the States, and he left me a letter. And in the letter, he stated that Flying Tigers will no longer be operating here. So as soon as you can, just get your family out. Yeah, the situation is getting worse. See? So with that, I was able to send my family to the United States, not through Flying Tigers, because when I received his letter, it was too late. And then
how did they come out? Your family?
Then also through Flying Tigers, I knew World Airways. So it was that connection with World Airways that I sent my family out about 10 days before the collapse of South Vietnam. But I decided to stay back because I was not sure whether or not we could pull it off or it's going to be taken over by the North Vietnamese. So I decided to stay back because with me alone, I could jump into any airplane and I could fly myself out. With our family, it's going to be easy. And
nobody would stop you if they were there.
Right.
If the Ho Chi Minh group.
Right. And also looking at my flight schedule for Vietnam, I knew I've got a few flights, one to Singapore and one to the Philippines and one to Tokyo on the 30th of April. So I say I would be okay.
So during the war, you were still doing flights to other countries?
Yes, yes. Towards the end of the war, I was flying commercially for Air Vietnam.
So there was commercial flight. Again, we don't think of that in the middle of a war. I never thought of that.
Yes, we bought some Boeing airplanes from Pan American.
Yeah.
Yes, and we flew mostly in the Southeast Asia itineraries.
And then I guess then you came to the United States. We're going to talk about that when we return. Your book is so interesting, and we were talking about your earlier life in Vietnam and why you changed, why you left the North and went to the South, and now suddenly the war is over and you're told you should go to the United States. Did it ever for a moment think, well, maybe I should stay in the North? I mean in the South, even if the North takes over?
That was a very, very clear decision in my mind. Even way back in the mid-50s when the country was divided, I decided to not living under the despotic, tyrannical regime of the communists.
Yeah.
So that was the first time. The second time, I had no doubt in my mind that I had to get out.
Did you fly yourself out? Is that what you did?
No. Finally, I had a friend that works at the embassy, and he was the one that I asked to, when you see that the situation was completely hopeless, let me know and I'll get out, I'll flee. But then I was hesitant to leave before, fearing that I may become a deserter in the event that we could pull it off. Yeah. See, so by about the 27th of April, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, my friend called and said, it is over. So whenever you have a chance to get out, get out. By the way, there is one U.S. Air Force C-141 who would depart Saigon this morning, early in the morning on the 27th.
Yeah.
And you can get a seat on that to get to Guam. And I did exactly what he said, contacted the U.S. Air Force liaison officer there, and he put me in that airplane and flew me to Guam.
So now there you are in Guam, and now you're a refugee without a country.
That's correct. I became a stateless political refugee at Guam.
Where was your family?
My family was sent to the United States on the 20th.
But they were in the United States, not in Guam.
They were flown directly to Oakland by World Airways. And I have to also say that World Airways was so generous and humanitarian with the chairman of World Airways, Mr. Ed Daly, he flew the Vietnamese, about 200 people, to Oakland. He housed them and he fed them.
How wonderful.
Yes, every day, waiting for their families to come. So when I got to Guam, I was pretty quickly processed and sent to Camp Pendleton. And from Camp Pendleton, with my security clearance and whatnot, I was processed out of Camp Pendleton, and I learned that my family was with World Airways in Oakland. So I went to Oakland to meet my family. Yes.
But you said something very lovely when we were not on the air about being a refugee and what America did for you.
Okay.
And I'd love to hear that, and I like
Yes.
to share it with our viewers.
Yes. Many Vietnamese, when they first left Vietnam, many of them resented that the U.S. had abandoned them. But I had a little bit different opinion on that, because the U.S. had to do what the U.S. had to do. It is the national interest at the time that the U.S. had to do that. So I compare, talk to them, I compare. Look at the Chinese. They dominated Vietnam for 800 years. What did they give us? Nothing. The French colonized Vietnam for 80 years. When they got out of Vietnam, what did they give us? Nothing. And the U.S. came over to Vietnam not to colonize Vietnam, but to help Vietnam. But because of global politics or domestic politics, that the U.S. had to withdraw. But look at what they did. They opened their house, their door, they opened their heart to take us in, to give us a second chance to rebuild our life, and to give us a place to call home. So with that, my family does not have any resentment towards the United States. They are much better than many other countries. I know that we are not perfect, but still to us, it's the greatest nation on earth.
When did you become an American citizen? Was that shortly after? Or did you have to give that some thought?
It took us 5 years. It took us 5 years to become American citizen.
Yeah.
See.
Now, what are you have sons? I know you have your children.
Yes, my children automatically became American citizens when I got naturalized to be American.
I see.
Yeah, because they were teen-age children. So, yes.
And do they feel as you do?
Same thing, yes.
Because they're, you know, in school, you never know what they're going to hear.
They feel the same way as I do, and many of them don't even want to go to Vietnam.
Yeah. And how did you feel returning? What did you see as far as the conditions over there? Because naturally we get a lot of propaganda. Americans go there on cruise ships all the time now, and they all say, "Oh, it's so beautiful." So, you know, I'm just wondering how you feel, what you saw when you went back to see your mother.
Superficially, one can say that the economic in Vietnam is booming and good, but that is superficial. The majority, great majority of Vietnamese, both in North and South Vietnam, are still dirt poor. They are still fighting to make ends meet, not like those communist cadres. The communist cadres are no longer poor peasants. They are now red capitalists.
Yes. It's China.
Yes. And
amazing.
Coming to Vietnam, I was so disappointed. Hanoi was no longer the Hanoi that I had known before in many respects. Morality, culture, traditions, virtues, all went to a steep decadence. A case in point was when I and my wife went to our ancestors' graveyards. A group of about 20 Vietnamese kids, ranging from like 13, 14 to 18, following us, begging for monies. They are no beggars, but they ask for monies to, do you want me to clean up the tomb of your father or your grandfather? I say, well, we'll handle it, thank you. Yeah. And all of them, all at once, they threw at us all of the worst profanities.
Because you didn't give them money or help them?
No, I did not give them the money.
No, I'm saying that's why.
That was the cause. That was the cause. And then when my wife and I burning the incense to worship my ancestors, they kept swearing at us.
Oh.
Yeah. And I asked them to please leave us alone so that we can do this. No. All of the worst, dirty profanities were bombarded at us. And that was not the only place. Everywhere we went were probably practically the same. And when I and my mother and my wife went through the market to buy some flowers to go to the graveyards, and one of the acquaintances of my mother brought over the flowers. We picked them, and my mother asked her, "Where's your mom? Where's your mom?" And she said, "Oh, she's going out with the young guy." And you know, there's no decency anymore.
Well, but you know, we have a lot of things going on here now that are kind of distressful to some who are a little older.
Well, especially from where I am coming from, and especially with the...
Well, what about, and there is very little time again, but what about Saigon? I mean, we heard that, you know, the Americans went to Saigon during the war and Americanized it. Did they?
Well,
and was there resentment over that?
In Saigon, life was just a little bit different, but there are more beggars in Saigon after the war, during the post-war. More beggars all over the places. And the second time I came back to see my mother, when she asked us to come back when she had her 90th birthday, yes, we returned. And then we decided to go to Saigon to join with my sister-in-law in Saigon before going back to the States. And in Saigon, I ran into a big surprise when my wife and I and my sister-in-law, coming down from the hotel, we decided to grab a cab to go to Chalon. And randomly, I opened the door for my wife and my sister to go to the back seat, and I sat in the front with the cab driver. Pulling out the curb about 400 or 500 yards, the young driver looked at me and asked me with my full name, Uncle Tran Ba Hoi, how have you been? And it was a very surprise. I looked at him while my wife was pushing the back seat as if to tell me to shut up. Something is strange in here. And then I turned around to ask him, why do you know my name? And he said, I know you all along, Uncle Tran Ba Hoi. I know you when you were a flight instructor in Nha Trang Air Base. And looking at his age, I don't think he was even born when I was in Nha Trang.
So he was just keeping track of you. So they knew you were there. They knew your history.
Yes.
And
yes.
That's scary.
The next day, I asked a friend of mine who got left in Saigon. I asked him to come to the hotel for breakfast. I told him the situation. I asked him, and he said, there are secret police. They knew who you are, but they do not want to risk losing tourist monies, so therefore they give you a warning. I know who you are. Be careful. Don't do something crazy. That was what I was told.
Well, thank you so much for coming back again. And again, the book is A Vietnamese Fighter Pilot in an American War. And it's a fantastic book. So please get it. You can order it. And if you missed part one of this interview, please go to On Demand, and you can find it. Just scroll on the bottom, and you'll see Gloria Greer, and I'm sure it'll say part 1 and of this particular show. And do join us all the time here. But this has been a very special pleasure for me, and I'm sure for our viewers. Again, thank you for being with us, and we'll see you here next time.